Today we're making the puffy sweatshirt. I love this pattern and it's so trendy right now. The fabric I'm using is from ISEE Fabrics and it's in the color Petal. To begin, lay out your back piece with the right side facing up and then place the front piece on top of it with the right sides together. Sew or serge across both shoulder seams. If you are sewing, make sure to use a stretch stitch and use a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now that the front and back piece are attached, lay it out so that it's right side up. Take one sleeve piece and find the center of it. Clip or pin the center of the sleeve to the shoulder seam, right sides together. Then stretch out the sleeve until it matches up with the notch or marking that you made. Pin it here and at the marking or notch on the other side. Beginning at one of the notches, sew or serge the sleeve in place. You are sewing here around a curve, so go slow and adjust your fabric as needed. Then repeat these steps for the next sleeve. And this is what your sweatshirt should look like now. Take your neckband piece and fold it in half with right sides touching. Sew or serge across the short side, connecting them. To create the neckband shape, open up this piece of fabric and fold it in half, but this time with wrong sides touching and folding it in half lengthwise. To make the neckband easier to place on the bodice, we're going to 1/4 it. To do this, first find the seam in the neckband and place a pin right in the seam. Then stretch out the neckband and find a mark that's directly across from the seam and place a pin right in that too. Then connect your 2 pins so that they're touching each other and place pins in the opposite corners from those 2 sides. We're going to pin the neckband now to the sweatshirt, and we're going to start by finding the center back of the sweatshirt. After you've found this crease, use the back seam on the neckband and pin that right there at the back crease. Then do the same thing for the front of the sweatshirt, finding the direct center and pinning the opposite pin to that. With the front and back pinned, now stretch out the neckband so that it can exactly match with the opening in the neck of the bodice. Where your pin lands on the side, pin it there, and repeat that for the other side. The neckband is intentionally smaller than the opening on the bodice, so as we're sewing the neckband on, we need to stretch it a little bit so that it can meet the opening. The pins will help guide you how much to stretch. After you finish sewing, flip the neckband so that it's standing up in place and press it down if you desire. Take your sweatshirt and flip it inside out so that right sides are now touching. It's time to sew together the sleeves and the sides. Start at the edge of one sleeve and go all the way around down the side and to the bottom. Then repeat for the other sleeve inside. When you're done, it will look like this. Go ahead and flip it now right side out so that the wrong sides are touching again. Take one of the arm cuffs and fold it in half so right sides are touching. Sew down the long side of this cuff. Just like you did with the neckband, fold the cuff again in half, but this time with wrong sides touching, and fold it in half lengthwise. Now you have your cuff piece. Repeat this for the other arm cuff. To place the cuff on the sweatshirt, make sure your sweatshirt is turned right side out. Find the seam of the cuff and match it up with the bottom seam on the sleeve of the sweatshirt. Pin or clip it in place here. Then you're going to need to really stretch your cuff all the way so that it fits around the opening of the sleeve to the other side. Pin it in place here too. Starting at the bottom seam, begin sewing the arm cuff onto the sleeve opening. As you sew, you're going to really have to stretch the arm cuff to make it fit all the way onto the opening. Try not to stretch the sleeve material, just the cuff material. When you're done, turn the cuff right side out and repeat for the other side. Now we'll add the waistband. Take your two waistband pieces and place them right sides together, and you're going to sew down both short sides. Open up the waistband just like you did the arm cuffs and the neckband. Open it up all the way and then fold it in half so that wrong sides are touching. This will make your band. With your sweatshirt right side out, you're going to use the two seams on the waistband and match them up with the two side seams on your sweatshirt. Again, the waistband is intentionally smaller than the opening on the waist, so you'll have to stretch your band to get it all the way across. Sew all the way around this circle, attaching the waistband to the sweatshirt. You'll have to stretch the waistband slightly to fit it all the way around. Use the pins on either side to guide you on how much to stretch. Try not to stretch the sweatshirt itself as you're sewing it on. Flip the waistband out and tuck the seam allowance into the sweatshirt. Now your waistband is all done. Your sweatshirt looks great and it is perfectly normal to stop here, but if you would like to add something to cover that back seam allowance and make your sweatshirt look a little bit more professional, follow me along for the next few steps. For this step, I'm going to my sewing machine and I needed to change my thread so that it matched my sweatshirt. It's especially important that your bobbin thread matches. Then flip your sweatshirt over so the back side is facing you and it's still right side out. Now flip the neckband up so that you can totally see the seam allowance. Pick up your back neck piece and fold it in half so that right sides are facing each other. Use a pin to mark the fold so that you know where the center is. Then line the center up with the back center seam on the neckband. The end of the neck piece should stretch all the way to the shoulder seam. Right at the shoulder seam, flip over the end of the neck piece 1/2 inch so that the right side is facing you. Pin it in place and then repeat these steps at the other shoulder seam. When it's pinned, you're going to start at one shoulder seam and sew all the way across to the other shoulder seam. You're going to sew with probably a 3/8 inch seam allowance because you want to be just under the 1/4 inch seam that you had previously sewn. And use a stretch stitch or a zigzag stitch here because this area will receive some stretch when you're all done. When you're done sewing, flip the sweatshirt around and push the neckband back in place. You'll now have a flap of fabric covering the old seam that used to be visible. You might need to iron that flap in place so that it stays down. My material is pretty thick, so I'm going to trim up the seam allowance to make sewing down that flap a lot easier in the next step. The sweatshirt should still be right side out. You're going to take that flap and tuck the raw edge underneath the seam allowance from when you sewed the neckband onto the bodice. You're going to tuck it under and then pin or glue it in place. And your flap will be just a little bit wider than mine, so hopefully it will stay in place just a little bit better too. Okay, once that raw edge is tucked under and pinned in place, you're going to be sewing 2 stitch lines. One across the bottom, right where you tucked under the raw edge, and then one across the top. Use a stretch stitch for both of these stitch lines, and if you want to put a size tag or a shop tag, now is a great time to tuck it in there while you're doing the sewing. And this is what it'll look like when you're all done. Now that back seam is covered and it should be comfortable for the person who's wearing it. I love how this sweatshirt turned out. I can't wait for it to be modeled. and I can't wait to make a whole bunch more.